Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about the things that a lot of people asked in the past and even more now. Since 2.4 is coming soon, who to pull for, Xiao or Ganyu? Xiao and Ganyu are two of the strongest DPS units so far in the game, and having one of them definitely can help you clear harder contents such as Spiral Abyss 12. But unlike the previous banner in which Xiao comes after Ganyu, the RERUN banner supposedly will have both of them at the same time, and for free-to-play players, this will be a really hard choice since both Xiao and Ganyu are very much desired and they are strong in their own way. So now we'll talk about the pros and cons of Xiao and Ganyu, and hopefully by doing so, you'll know which to pull for. First, we'll talk about Xiao. The reason why Xiao is considered to be one of the strongest DPS is because of how high his damage multipliers are and how massive his plunge AoE range is. But even if he deals AoE damage, his plunge damage to a single target cannot be taken as a joke either. That's how powerful Xiao is. He's designed to be a hyper carry, and that's how you should play Xiao in your team. Since Xiao is a hyper carry, he needs to be in the field as long as you can to deal his massive DPS, so you may want to build a team where they can constantly support Xiao with the buffs he needs. If you put Xiao off the field, he provides nothing at all to his team, thus resulting in a lower overall DPS numbers. Xiao's team comp usually consists of one off-field sub-DPS, one animal battery, and one utility unit. For off-field sub-DPS, there are a lot of options for it, such as Albedo, Visual, Xingqiu, etc. Also, if you have Albedo and you have an C4, you can increase Xiao's plunging attack damage by another 30%, which is considered as a really huge boost to his damage output. The reason we need an off-field sub-DPS is because Xiao needs to be on the field as much as he can to deal his massive DPS. Also, the reason we need an animal battery is because of how high his elemental burst cost is. It costs 70 energy, and Xiao lacks the energy recharge to fuel his elemental burst. Most of Xiao's damage output comes from his elemental burst, so being unable to maintain his elemental burst is a huge DPS loss. For the last slot, usually you can use characters that boost attacks such as Bennett, or someone who can provide shields such as Zhongli. Why Shielder is important in Xiao's team is because most of your team's damage output comes from Xiao's plunging attack, so you want to maximize his number of plunge attacks to as many as you can. But while doing so, Xiao is vulnerable to attacks, and if you're staggered, you just wasted 1 or 2 seconds worth of DPS. For Xiao's constellations, having him at C0 is already enough. Even at C0, he can easily help your team to clear Abyss 12. His C1 adds an extra charge to his elemental skill, so he can generate more particles for himself. This gives you a bit more flexibility when building energy recharge on him. His C2 and C4 doesn't really contribute much to his damage output. C3 and C5 is just a talent level up. But his C6 changes him entirely. As long as you're hitting 2 enemies with your plunge attack while in your burst mode, you automatically gain a charge of his elemental skill, and it will ignore the cooldown of the elemental skill. His C6 increases his DPS so much that he can be considered as the strongest DPS in the game at the moment. So you have him at C6, you might want to focus on your elemental skill talent level, as that becomes the main source of your damage output instead of the plunging attack. So if you want Xiao, you can either go for C0 or C1, or fully commit to get his C6. Currently, there are only a few good selections of pull-on for Xiao. For force options, you can either use Deathmatch or Black Cliff. In actual practice, both of them don't differ too much. For 5-star weapons, Primordial Jade Wing Spear or Staff of Homa is the best choice for him. Depending on your artifact rolls, you can use either Staff of Homa or Primordial Jade to maintain the 1 to 2 crit rate crit damage ratio, but since his Ascension stats are crit rate, it gives you the flexibility to focus more on finding crit damage rolls on your artifacts. Typically, for Xiao's artifact set, you might want to use 2-piece Iridescent Venereer and 2-piece Gladiator or 2-piece Shimenawa, since both have the same 2-piece effect. But since Xiao's elemental burst converts his attack into animal damage, and it also buffs the damage by a ton, having 2-piece Iridescent Venereer and 2-piece Gladiator's effect is optional. Since we know how bad artifact grinding can be, giving him artifacts with the best substat rolls still benefits Xiao greatly, making it easier for you to build your Xiao and get him ready for the party. Now we'll talk about Ganyu. As we all know, Ganyu is one hell of a broken DPS. Her charge shot's damage multiplier is so crazy that even at C0, she can solo most of the contents in the game. Her charge shot is so busted that even with a free-to-play weapon, she can easily deal 30k to 40k damage per charge shot, and with a high refinement free-to-play weapons, she can easily deal 40k to 50k damage per charge shot. Her Ascension mainly increases her crit damage, and her Ascension 1 increases her crit rate by 20% for 5 seconds after using her level 2 charge shot, aka Frost Flake Arrow. What's crazy about all of this is Cryo Resonance increases her crit rate by 15% to frozen enemies, her Ascension increases 20% of her crit rate after firing her Frost Flake arrows, using Blizzard Sprayer on her gives her 20% crit rate to enemies affected by Cryo, and another 20% on frozen enemies. That's an easy 75% crit rate bonus without any crit rate rolls in her artifacts. Also, since she is a bow user, hitting enemies' weak points will trigger a critical hit, so she doesn't even need crit rate most of the time. Her elemental skill casts an Ice Lotus in place and taunts all non-bosses targets to attack it, while also sliding backwards, giving Ganyu the space she needs to reposition herself. Her elemental burst is also no joke. It casts 50 icicles over the span of 15 seconds, with a guarantee of minimum 10 per target, and once the icicle hits, it deals AoE damage in a small area around the enemy's hit. So if you group 5 enemies together, and each icicle hits all 5 of the enemies, that's 50 icicles per enemy, which is really insane. She can fit in the role of a hyper carry or even support, depending on how you build her. For Meltcom, you might want to build Ganyu with 2 Pyro units, the first Pyro being Xiangling, since she can constantly apply Pyro using her burst, and the second being Bennett or Klee to act as a battery for Xiangling, since Xiangling's burst requires 80 energy. For the last slot, you can use any utility units such as Zhongli for shield and elemental shred, Diona or Rosaria for Cryo Resonance, or even Fenty to CC enemies and as a battery. The artifact set for Melt Ganyu typically uses 4-piece Shimenawa or 4-piece Wanderer's Troop, since both provides damage bonus to charge attacks. For Freeze Ganyu, she is often paired with Mona or Kokomi to apply Hydro off field, and Fenty to group all the enemies together, maximizing her DPS since her Elemental Burst Ice Shard deals AoE damage on hit, making the damage she deals scales quadratically. She typically uses 4-piece Blizzard Shreyer to maximize the crit rate and cryo damage she dealt by her Elemental Burst, and I think it's really cheap to build considering all the time we spent farming Heart of Depth's artifact, only to get God rolls on the Blizzard Shreyer set. Same as Xiao, Ganyu is not that reliant on her constellations. Even at C0, she can easily crush all her enemies. Her C1 decreases her opponent's cryo resistance when they are hit by her Frostblack arrows or the Bloom, and it also generates 2 particles on each level 2 charge shot, regardless if the arrow hits the target or not. This is a really good constellation, as it boosts her damage even further and also helps her to generate more energy to cast her elemental bursts. Her C2 adds another charge to her elemental skill, allowing Ganyu to have a better energy generation and reposition herself away from the enemy. Her C3 and C5 is just a level up. Her C4 makes the enemy standing in the elemental burst AoE to take an increased damage by 5% every 3 seconds, up to 25%. This just makes Ganyu overall damage to scale even higher. Her C6 is the same as Xiao. It changes her playstyle completely. After casting her elemental skill, the next Frostblack arrow within 30 seconds doesn't require any charging. This increases her damage output to a ridiculous level, since she can perform more charge shots in an equal window of time. Emma's bow without a doubt is her BIS weapon, because her bloom will hit the enemy 0.3 seconds after her Frostblack arrow hits, so this is a fixed 24% damage bonus on every single bloom she fires. R1 Thundering Pulse, R1 Polar Star, and R5 Prototype Crescent on weak spot perform similarly to each other, so even if you don't have any 5-star bows, the F2P Prototype Crescent is still a really great choice for Ganyu. Hamayumi bow is also a good option, but it performs worse when Prototype Crescent hits the enemy weak spot, but performs better when Prototype Crescent doesn't hit the enemy's weak spot. Black Cliff bow is also a good option, but it has the caveat of needing to defeat 3 opponents to get the attack bonus from the weapon's passive. As we have seen, both Xiao and Ganyu are hyper carries. They are so strong that having one of them in your team can help you to crush most of the enemies you are facing. But the question remains on, with the limited amount of primogems most players have, who to pull for? Which character is the best investment for our limited primogems? For me, I personally choose Ganyu over Xiao because of how ridiculous her damage multipliers are, and how easy it is for her to maintain her damage output throughout the whole time. Xiao requires his elemental burst for him to be able to deal huge damage. It might seem that Xiao deals more damage over time in the beginning, but as the time goes on, he suffers from the lack of energy. Being unable to cast his elemental burst means that his DPS will fall short in comparison to Ganyu, who can constantly perform her charged attack and scale up her damage even further by casting her elemental skill and elemental burst all together. At lower constellations, Xiao requires his team to back him up by providing energy particles to maintain his burst uptime, but as his constellations get higher, his C1 and C2 helps him to fix some of his energy problems. And at C6, his damage output goes through the roof, and he practically doesn't have any more energy issues since he will always recharge his elemental skill when his punch attack hits 2 or more enemies. But Ganyu on the other hand, even in lower constellations, can already deal a huge chunk of damage to the enemy, and her constellations just skyrockets her damage output to an even higher level. At C6, she also becomes one ridiculous DPS unit with how fast she can perform her frostbreak arrows. Also, Anemo has no elemental reactions and is considered to be the weak element alongside Geo, whereas Cryo has a melt reaction where it can scale the damage even further. But in the end, you play a game for fun. You don't need to always follow the meta on who you should pull. If you like the design of a character, just go for it and don't think of anything else. As long as you have fun, that's all that matters. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you still have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try my best to answer to any of the questions that you have. Also, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time.